Most of you know Ross Gittins as the economics editor of the Sydney Morning Herald for a long time, since 1978, and introduced many of us to economics, and thankfully for that. He's also a columnist for The Age, the sister paper in Melbourne. His journalistic experience includes editorial writing and stints in the parliamentary press galleries in Sydney and Canberra. Before joining the Sydney Morning Herald, he worked as an auditor with the national chartered accounting firm Touche Ross and Company. He's got a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Newcastle and is an associate of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia. He was a Nuffield Press Fellow at Wolfson College in Cambridge in 1983 and journalist in residence at the Department of Economics at the University of Melbourne in 1994. In 1993, he won the Citibank Pan Asia Award for Excellence in Finance Journalism, and as many of us will know, he's written and contributed to numerous books and publications on popular economics. Could I ask Ross Gittins to respond?
David Gruen has given us a highly competent and comprehensive economist's exposition of the causes and consequences of the global financial crisis and the global recession it has precipitated, both for the globe and for Australia. I disagree with very little of it. So using David's exposition as a base, I want to give you my take on the causes of the crisis, and in doing so, step back from all the detail to try to identify the more general patterns of behaviour involved. Let me say for the HSC students here, what David said was much more on the syllabus than what I'm about to say. In a nutshell, my take is that the crisis was caused by the failures of human nature and the economic managers' reliance on a model of human behaviour that fails to take account of many aspects of that human nature. If that sounds so general as to be saying very little, let me try and give it some substance. Human beings aren't as rational as the economist's basic neoclassical model assumes, but are highly emotional. Even economists themselves are more driven by their emotions than many of them realise. Particularly because people are so influenced by the behaviour of those around them, the people who make up an economy are prone to alternating cycles of optimism and pessimism. So much so that it's now, and probably always has been, the main factor driving the business cycle of boom and bust, that alternating cycle of optimism and pessimism. During the optimistic phase, people happily take on ever-increasing risks and obligations. They spend rather than save, expanding their possessions and activities, pursuing status symbols, piling into the markets for property and shares, forcing prices up, then piling in some more just because prices are rising. They do all this confident in the belief that the good times will roll on forever and prices will only go higher. We now see more clearly than we did at the time just how much of this mentality drove the Howard government's response to the way its coffers overflowed during the resources boom. But of course, as we all know, but all keep forgetting, some of it eventually causes the boom to end, and when it does, the prevailing mood flicks from optimism to pessimism. People become afraid, they worry about all the commitments they've taken on, they abandon their plans for expansion, and they tighten their belts. Householders do that, but businesses do too. On many asset markets, but as David was pointing out, probably not our housing market, prices go from being unrealistically high to being unrealistically low. The result is business failures, layoffs, and rapidly rising unemployment. And we saw the forecasts for that from David as well. This causes the fear to deepen into a pessimism which assumes the world will stay bad forever. My first point is that though economists know full well that the economy moves in cycles of optimism and pessimism, boom and bust, and a large branch of economics is devoted to studying the management of the business cycle, macroeconomics, economists don't have much of a handle on the factors that drive the cycle, particularly those that derive from human psychology. They accept that confidence is a major influence on the cycle, but they can't get confidence into their mathematical equations, so they end up underrating its importance. With economists, there's always a gap between what they understand intellectually and what actually influences what they do and the predictions they make. A big part of the problem is that conventional microeconomics has no place for psychology or for the business cycle, assuming the economy is always at full employment because it's self-equilibrating, or as you might say more simply, self-correcting. The economy will always correct itself. So you can't really have a business cycle of any consequence, and you certainly can't have anything like a major recession or depression. Alan Greenspan admitted that he'd made a mistake believing the banks, operating in their own self-interest, would do whatever was necessary to protect their shareholders and their institutions. He had too much faith in the economy's self-correcting powers because he assumed we'd behave rationally, not emotionally. My second point is that this chronic underestimation of human failings tempted economists and regulators to run a partially deregulated financial system, on the one hand, and not to worry about weaknesses in the remaining regulatory system, such as the US economy's multiple regulatory agencies sharing responsibility for the system. David mentioned the different ones responsible for the housing market, but it's true in other parts of the financial market. And also the operation of the hedge funds, which operated completely outside the regulatory regime, and that didn't seem to concern anybody terribly much. So here we have a fatal combination of model-blinded thinking on the part of the economics profession and blatant self-interest on the part of powerful vested interests in the financial markets. When they're in optimism mode, business people always want to be completely free to do as they please in their push for profits. And anybody who wants to regulate them is someone who is very bad, a socialist, someone who is acting to damage the economy and make us all poorer. But because the big banks and other players in the financial markets aren't rational and are capable of getting carried away in a boom and doing stupid things they later come to regret, they do need fairly close supervision to protect them from themselves and to protect us from them. In the absence of that supervision, it was inevitable that the episode would end in disaster.